Check one, check two, mic check. Mic check one, mic check.
How we doing? Is this working? We okay? Okay, focus group members, since this is being telecast, when you ask your question, you'll need to use a microphone. So there's one on each table, and then this is a wireless mic we can also use to pass back and forth. So just way that has background. Our first candidate for you today is Narcisse. Welcome, Cito.
Thank you.
This group has 15 questions to ask you, and we've got
That's
one hour to accomplish our task, so be mindful of that. And if we could, please ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So,
Laura Hips.
Elaine Brown, Mayor of Neptune Beach.
Terry Brady, President of Duval Teachers United, representing 11,000 employees here in the district. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Eleanor Atkins, representing the Jacksonville branch, NAACP.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Good morning, Susan Toller with the Florida Blue Foundation.
Good morning.
Good morning, Susan Cuthbertson, and I'm a community leader.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Cable. I'm the president of the Arthur Viney Davis Foundation, and I'm here representing the Civic Council.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Nina Waters, president of the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Edelman, retired teacher and fellow Commodore.
Okay. Good morning. Great school.
Jordan Baker, a retired principal as well, and I'm representing the concerned citizens in support of education and all others.
All right. Good morning.
Jeff Edwards, Beaver Street Fisheries, representing the business community.
Okay. Good morning. Yeah, I could tell. I mean, Jeff.
All this food is for me.
so with that, we shall begin. Susan.
Okay, I get the first question. I'm excited. What about you, your personality, your skills, and your goals, along with your perception of the Duval County Public Schools' strengths and our opportunities, our challenges, makes you feel that you're the right person coming to the right place at the right time? Or more succinctly, why do you want to be our next superintendent, and why should we want you to be our superintendent?
I like all those questions. Let me tell you a little bit about myself outside of the resume. You probably read through the whole resume. So I have been in urban education for just now more than 18 years. You're talking to an English language learner. I think I tell people just because I can speak English well now and do all those things. My parents are I'm the son of Haitian immigrants. My mom and dad came to New York, as a lot of immigrants that are from Haiti. Between New York, Miami, there's like South Florida is usually the big context of where they land. And when they came, as most immigrant students, was to learn English and get a better life. And I've been fortunate. I came from humbling beginnings. And my mom actually learned English with me in school by trying to help me do homework. She got better with my little brother, who tried to manipulate a little bit, but that didn't work because her English was really well at that time. But I was able to really kind of get more context on how to navigate through our school system. And the reality is, although I've been one of the fortunate ones growing up in my community that's been able to get an education and had enough mentors to do that work, there's a lot of things that have gone on around the context of urban education that impacts whether you're successful or not. And I would first start off by telling you that I believe I have the right skills to do this job. I have worked in many, many large districts, many, many urban districts that are complex, just as Duval County. But more importantly, I've worked in places where I've learned a lot of lessons, and I'm always a learner. I think in these jobs, you never know everything. If somebody tells you that, they're lying to you. And more importantly, you learn about how you have to work with different type of people, different contexts, with whether it's through race, class, a whole lot of different issues. Because in our history in education, especially in the United States, there's a lot of complexities around that. And so what I've learned in working a lot of places is how you have to be able to work with different group of folks and support different sets of communities, whether it's teachers in schools, principals, and working with different civic leaders to kind of galvanize a city around education. Duval County Public Schools is the most important entity to Duval County because this is where the future is of our vibrant city. And so my view of the world, and to answer your question around why I think I have the skills, I have been a teacher, I've been a assistant principal, I've worked as principal in 2 cities, I have been a director of school performance in a large district in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is about 150,000 kids. I've been an associate superintendent in Prince George's County, about 130,000 kids with the same complexities. And now I am the number 2 in charge in Nashville, Metro Nashville Public Schools, which is also a great community of 169 schools, 88,000 students, and I would argue they have the same complexities as Duval County. We have an urban, a suburban, and a rural core, and we tackle the same sets of issues on trying to help support teachers and schools and communities to be successful. And those complexities are important for the person that becomes the next superintendent of Duval, and I believe I'm that person.
There's a relatively fine line between effective, inclusive leadership and dictatorship, as well as between effective, inclusive leadership and paralysis. Using whatever terms you are comfortable with and using specific examples from your current or previous leadership positions, tell us about your leadership style. How do you bring people along with you, and how do you know when to step out ahead?
So, great question. I did my dissertation on school community partnerships. I was very young when I got my doctorate. I was a whippersnapper. I thought I knew everything. Then I learned, oh my gosh, I know nothing. And one thing you learn about when you work with people, because in this level, it's working with people to impact students, that you have to be able to engage and move the work around helping people problem solve and building coalitions. And that building coalition is in a lot of different contexts. When you're doing this job, you will have a lot of different groups pulling at you, and you have to work with the board, with the business community, with the civic leaders, with the faith base, all these elements to move the work, and making sure that everybody keeps the North Star of the students the guiding point. And there's all these background conversations and all these things that happen, and you have to keep moving that North Star around that same work. So my style, I am a problem solver, and I work with people. I don't have a dictatorship. I'm a problem solver. I really believe that culture impacts how schools function. I tell people when I think about teachers that leave schools, they're not leaving schools because of pay. They're leaving schools because of a manager. They don't have somebody who supports them and move the work. And so you have to kind of work with people to create those type of professional development opportunities to do that. You have to do the same thing with your senior leadership team. You have to model. Whatever you do at the top, you do at the bottom. The district is not about the superintendent. I want everybody to hear that. It is about the district as a whole. It's not even about the board. It's about how we collectively move the work. And if you don't do that in a very strategic way, especially when you have a lot of different people pulling at you, you will not be successful in this job. Or you leave a lot of bad blood that you have to keep trying to mix through over years and years and years. And so I've learned from working from a lot of different folks who I would suggest are successful and some who did learn some tough lessons, that I was fortunate enough to be the number 2 guy to say, when I'm in that spot, I won't be doing that. All right? But, and so I feel that I'm ready because over those times, those are the things that I learned. So when it comes to the leadership style, I believe that I'm situational. And what's important is that I help move people. And more importantly, it's important for even the person that you're moving, for them to see themselves as being a part of moving that product or moving the work to help support students. If they don't see it, then you get folks that are doing the work and they don't believe in buying, and you're not going to get maximum performance. And so there's a lot of communication, a lot of listening, a lot of engaging, and really trying to move people towards the vision of the school district. So.
Hi, I'm next. Whether we like it or not, parents and communities are embracing school choice and a wider range of school options. How do you view the choice movement, and how would you approach the growing movement here in Duval County?
Yeah, so I told the board members this on the one-on-one meetings yesterday. I said, you know, I'm a little biased, and I want to put that up front. I think that being a Working in an urban district matters, and it's different. And it's a different set of experience around how you do that work. The intensity, the issues that happen. If you sit in, most of us that are a part of the Council of Great City Schools, where all the urban districts get together, and Duval's part of that, we all have the same set of issues. And one of the things that you learn is that you have to try to figure out how do you get through those issues. The school choice component that's in Duval is not very unique. There are probably different ways you can improve that, but I don't think choice is a bad thing. I tell folks choice is actually a good thing, but I do think it's important that we help with quality programs. What I care about is Duval is the choice. And I think Duval being the choice in how we help schools market, how we help schools move that work is important. Because people usually, when they live certain places, they like their neighborhood or community schools. And so how do you think about those processes around that work? So I don't have a concern around choice. I think choice is good. I do think you have to manage through that. I think you can't have 50,000 choices. I think they have to be quality choices, quality programs, and quality schools. The choice component, I think, has been, depending on how it's been created over a period of time, is complex. But when I look at our system, we have many magnet schools, we have charters, we have other traditional schools, and that pulls a lot in a lot of different directions. And so I think about that choice, you have to kind of really be strategic about how you go about that, so everyone feels that the quality of where they go to school, they're very comfortable with that.
What was the issue, and how was it resolved?
Yeah, pick a day. Oh, this is probably the easiest of all the questions. All right, so if you want to be entertained, you can look at our newspaper. One of the things that we pushed last was Title I funding in Nashville. And our board charged the superintendent and the team to move towards equity. And one thing that we always say is everybody wants equity till you bring it to them. But the reality is when you work with a community that's complex, right? Cities are complex because they're different type of people in different walks of life. You have to carry people along through that process. So when we went through the process, I was the guy in charge of shifting Title I funds in Nashville and working with the superintendent in that process. And there's lessons learned too, because we've learned a lot of lessons through that process. We have about almost 49 schools that have 100% poverty. And the correlation between poverty and poor performance was clear. And the reality that we were doing, we were giving everybody money. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that was what the system was doing. And so we made we had conversations with the government, the state, the commissioner, and said we were going to make a shift. So as most times when you're making these hard shifts, you have to build a coalition of the willing and move folks. And we were in such a rate of speed of trying to do that because we were thinking about our budget and the timelines that when we went to make the shift, we almost kind of made communities interpreted as us against them, right? I'm sure that doesn't happen here in Duval. But when that happened, as you can imagine, it started to cause a rumble. And then what happened in terms of moving that initiative, it then became things around race, it became things around particular neighborhoods, and it just spiraled. So what we said was we were going to step back. We were still going to move the needle to all those Title I schools doing that, but we said we will now scale back and do it over time. Lessons learned, every community communicates in certain ways, fact. And you have to be able to understand how those communities communicate, and you have to start a year in advance to kind of ripen the soil so people can begin to feel comfortable about that. And I think that's a hard lift, because if you don't have the coalition of the willing to do that, you can pass anything, but the reality is people won't accept it. And the reality for us is it's not about just getting it through, it's about that the community saying, hey, we want to move it together. Jacksonville, just like Nashville, has complexities. It has a strong history around civil rights issues. It has a strong history around race, class, and all those pieces. But the reality is one Nashville, just like we're one Duval County. And so we have to be able to kind of walk through those things, and that's a reality of our country. There's no urban district in the United States that does not go through that. That's just one example. If you got time, I can give you 10 more examples. But that's the recent one. And so I think, and we were able to still move in a direction that was acceptable, but we said we were going to do it over 3 years, and the goal was, and that was much more accepting in that process.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Money. Many school systems, most school systems, really are continuing to face diminished dollars that come to the schools and the resources that we have. And the question really is, what sort of process would you use to meet those needs, those requirements of fiscal constraint and responsibility while still looking out for the needs of the students?
So yesterday in the one-on-one, I gave the board members a little cheat sheet. I put down lessons learned with a table chart on how to strategically cut, maximize your revenue, and then guiding questions. And I talked through with them because I said you have to really be clear about how you go about that. The board sets priorities. And once the board sets priorities, those priorities are set based on the strategic plan that should be accepted and designed with the community. And so you have to fiscally be strategic on how you go about that to support not only the movement of students, but also the organization, to support your teachers, to support your principals, and to make communities feel like they're able to move the system together. And so one of the things I will tell you is just in recently, because we just, what makes this very interesting question is because just before I left, I just left the budget meeting. And in Nashville, we made a $44 million request. We're about $890 million in Nashville. We're not 1.7 billion like Duval County. Montgomery County and Prince George's had 2.4 and 2.2, so the budgets are a little bit different. But one of the things is you have to prioritize what the investments are. I told the board members yesterday that if I go through your budget without even looking at it, I can find things you are doing that you should be abandoning. And those things, you should be able to focus more dollars towards students based on those priorities. And priorities should be set over 3 to 5 years. It shouldn't be a secret about what the priorities are. Federal dollars will always be cut. I think there's this belief that, the government's always going to write us this check. I haven't been in one urban district where we haven't had to cut. We've had 1 year where it's great, and the next year they give us X dollars. And so I believe, like a college president, the superintendent needs to be working with the business community, with different folks on raising dollars and being specific with philanthropists in the city about what the targets are. They should not be coming to them every year. You should know in the next 2 to 3, 4, 5, here's what we're investing in, and we're having conversations, and there's a metrics around that so you can measure whether we're having impact or not with students and communities. And so that's kind of the context. Did I answer your question?
It's being a fighter, fighting for those dollars, lobbying.
Yeah.
Those are the things that, we certainly need to have.
And one last thing just to add to that is a part of this job too, which I've been able to fortunately have my superintendent, because I'm the number 2 guy, I tell folks when they ask us things like, can the number 2 be number 1? Well, my boss was the number 2 being number 1 is, I hate to tell you guys, it's the number 2 really runs the district and helps the superintendent with the politics. So when I hear people say, can the number 2, I said, if you only knew what the responsibilities were on the list. But the reality is, Duval County we have to have a hand in working with other Florida urban districts around pushing on the legislature to be able to support us in different ways. We're not the same as other counties. We are probably very more similar to Palm Beach County, to Broward, but I would argue, because they are all also council districts, we have the same set of problems that we have to get through, and so we have to kind of push on those things. And that's another part of the job.
This question is to help us understand a bit more about you as a person. Okay. Give us a sense of what some of your core values are and what motivates you, especially what motivates you during times when things get very difficult and perhaps very weighted down with lots of things to do and not enough time to do it in. So what are your core values and what motivates you in this work?
Core values of my faith, that's important to me. And also, when I tell you this, I'm so humbled to be in front of you. You're looking at a kid who had braids, baggy jeans, Timberland boots, running in New York. And I was fortunate to have mentors to sit in front of you to be where I am. I had great teachers. There were two, I'm not a fraternity person, but there was two fraternities that did a lot of stuff with black males in New York. One was Omega Psi Phi, which was one fraternity, and Alphas, they were, that's correct. And they did a lot of stuff to mentor many young boys through those things. And I was just fortunate to attend. When my father, I went to college, my dad saw a lot of black guys in suits, and he was like, you gotta go to the colleges there, just because he saw that. Not that whether the school was good or not, but he believed that you have to be in an environment where you see things and you're constantly being able to navigate. Because if I wasn't strong enough, when I dealt with things that were inequitable or I dealt with different sets of issues, I wouldn't know how to self-manage. And I would argue that our kids, when I see struggles that are happening, those are the things they have to be able to be strong enough, particular students, to get where they need to get. And so one of my big supports, who's sitting on my right side, that's my wife, Maritza. Can you raise your hand? Dr. Maritza Gonzalez back there. And, my family's important to me. I listen. I try to listen as much as possible, engage as much as possible. I'm always in the fight. I hate to tell people this, but if you're crazy enough to take these jobs, you have to constantly, you're kind of a junkie a little bit around the work. I love to be around people that engage a lot. I love questions. I think a board member said, I ask a lot of questions. I said, good, I'm more concerned when you don't ask questions. So those are the things that drive me. I'm big on equity. I think that American school systems by design have inequities, and us as adults, we have to work together to figure those things out no matter what walk of life we are, what community we live in. I tell people, keep the main thing the main thing. And more importantly, I think I'm fulfilled by doing this. I see myself when I see the kids. I'm a product of the kids. So I'm a product of, when I tell people you want to see what success looked like, a Duval kid successful, I'm that kid. But I was just fortunate enough to make it. I've had friends who didn't make it, quite frankly, whether they went to prison or they died, or there's a lot of different factors, but that's my reality. And so, you build a self-efficacy, you try to stay strong, and you keep engaging around people who have the energy to engage with you. If I'm the superintendent, I tell folks I will be engaging with the strong folks who keep pushing, that want things to be right. But we engage with everybody regardless of your opinion. I think it's really important that you get a good cohort of people that really want to push and see the development of the city long term, not short term. And so those are kind of things that drive me. I don't know, I drink water, play piano. There's other things I like to do. I love sports. I take the trash out because my wife gets on me about that. She says, I don't care what boss you are, here you gotta take the trash out. So,
Thank you. Are we making you sweat yet? I don't see
not
any.
yet, not yet.
Okay,
But,
you're not even fidgeting.
We'll
I like
get
it.
there. Well, when you work in this type of work, you have to always. I like people, so
Okay. My question for you is, what do you prioritize as Duval's biggest challenge to advance educational performance? How would you address this obstacle, including naming the success factors that would be associated with it?
Oh man, that is a loaded question. Let me say this, because I think I anticipated this question a little bit. I have not been in Duval County, right? And it's important, I would tell you, that I have to listen, learn over and over with the different groups of folks. And as I listen and learn and start working and us engaging with the community, working with our teachers and our principals and the folks and the business community and the various folks, is for us to figure out together what the hopes and dreams of this city is. And I can anticipate and see what operationally we do. I can look at how the processes are the things that we do, right? But the reality is I have to really learn, really get a good sense around where us as a school system want to move, because those are the markers I'll be able to hit collectively with the group. and also try to make sure that we do it in a way where it's not inequitable. Because there's going to be groups where we're going to have to give a little bit more than others. And so the reason I said it's a loaded question is because if I walked in here and said to you, I would tell you, this is my 2 cents, I'd be very cautious of anyone to begin to tell you, here's what I see your problem is, here's what you do, here's this. I can look at all your data sets around performance from how kids are doing with English, math, all those things, and I can say to you, here's some gaps that I see from the data, but the reality is I don't know what's the impact in those particular communities for those gaps, because there's more to the story than just the numbers. I don't know the social emotional learning context of children, and I don't know if we've invested in that. I don't know if we did things around the arts. I don't know. So all of those pieces I have to really learn really well to be able to move. So one thing is I told the board yesterday, if I'm chosen as your superintendent, is I will create a transition team, including of internal stakeholders and external national stakeholders, because Duval we are a council district, and we have a lot of external resources that we can bring to look at how we've been moving on the strategic plan and the priorities of the system. So then we can go out to each of the various communities in the city and find out what their hopes and dreams are and what do they understand, and then we build together on whether it's in the student achievement area, the organizational effectiveness, the civic world, the investment with business partners. I think all of those things are important. So I'm always cautious, and again, the thing you get with me is lesson learned. I have been fortunate enough to be a part of a lot of large urban districts where I've seen folks come in and do things, and I've seen folks come in and learn stuff. And I would err on the caution of listening, learning, and then building out the plan, and then making the plan public to everyone. And then we can get groups together to work through that. And also making sure that we get a vibrant culture. I think culture matters when you're moving organizations. When you think about great organizations like Apple and Google, I tell folks, people who work for them, you never hear them talking bad about the organization. But in education, you always hear this tug of war that goes on and this self-efficacy that doesn't exist. And that's because people don't feel like they fit. And so you have to think about that, whether it's from race, class, communities, and all those components to bring people in. And that's the same, I would make the same argument to people in the organization. People have to see Duval County Public Schools in the organization as well.
Educating the whole child is one of those goals which is in constant jeopardy relative to the recent or pending cuts of music, art, PE, and other social, emotional, recreational programs considered by some not to be a part of the academic core. As superintendent, how important is educating the whole child to you, and what steps will you take to ensure that the whole child experience is available to all students?
Yeah, I believe in this thing called social emotional learning. It's a way that you work and you really think about the experiences of a child as a whole. I think that it's not sufficient enough anymore that we only talk about academics, because I tell people that kids have to self-regulate, self-manage, self-aware, and all these components to be successful. Those great teachers that you see that are having sometimes challenges in classrooms and working, sometimes they don't have enough support to do that type of work. And the principals sometimes don't create conditions for them to do that work. And so there's so much more to that. And so I believe in the arts. I believe in all those components. I think that a child has to be well-rounded. I think that communities have different ways of thinking about what well-rounded is. And I also think that there's some communities that want to have music or have arts and have those pieces. So I think that we have to talk through a little bit about which communities want to have what, and make sure that it's robust for all communities. And so those, I think, have to be more strategic around that. So I don't believe that schools should work by themselves around making those decisions. I think it has to be a community partnership around moving that work. I also think that when we talk about the musics and the arts and those components that are valuable, districts have challenges in trying to support those pieces because it's not always a strategic alignment budgetarily on how to do it, and they haven't planned over a period of time how to do it through pipelines. In school districts, or in the districts that I've worked in where there's been successful work with, and when I talk about pipeline, I talk about pre-K to 12, we call that a cluster, right? That entire cluster builds a pipeline for that success to happen. And so my push would be, if we're working around bringing in the arts in, is how do we do that in such a way so we can make sure we can see, as it begins from pre-K all the way to the 12th grade, that that's happening. And so that's kind of how I look at that from a budgetary standpoint.
What have you done in your current and past positions to improve low-performing schools, to help low-performing students in all schools in the district, and to address the diverse needs of the schools and communities in one or more of the districts where you were employed?
Great question. That's a great urban question, I tell folks. Right now in Nashville, we have about 9 turnaround schools that are designated by the state that are the lowest 5%. There's 9, but there's more schools, but the state designates 5%. I tell people Tennessee and Florida are like sisters. Anything Florida does, Tennessee does next, but that's a joke. But one thing I've learned, and I also was a turnaround principal, which was a very hard job. A lot of learned lessons too, because I would tell you I wasn't perfect doing that either. One of the things I tell folks is schools that have challenges with low socioeconomics, there's a correlation between low socioeconomics and performance. And I tell folks, don't lie to yourself about that. It's a reality. You pick a city, so you have to do a couple of things from my perspective. I've lived through a lot of reforms where they would say, oh, principal knows best. Well, there's no Superman principal that I've seen, and there's no Superman teacher I've seen. But I have seen people stick together on a common goal. When you look at the turnaround schools, we have 9 that are about to get out there. There are 9 right now in Nashville that are bottom 5%. They're out of the 9, 2 are about to exit that. And there's, because the leaders worked with the district on doing a focus over 3 years about how they were going to build capacity with their staff, focus on specific social emotional components to make sure those kids were able to get what they need around supporting them. And then last piece, to help them navigate through the academic components. And we began to see change happening with kids being able to read more and do those things because they did a lot of not only what was in the school day, but on time, we call it out of time school day, whether it was through providing with opportunities for extra homework or providing opportunity for doing enrichment activities and those components because they didn't get those things at home. When you come from a place where you don't have, school becomes your hub for everything. I mean, when I was a principal in Boston, I had children that would stay there till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I tell folks, imagine a child staying at a school, and I'm talking large amount of kids, because they felt like this was the place where it was more of a community model and I could do stuff. But it took a lot of dollars. And so you have to be able to make a marker and say, well, for these set of schools, how we're going to either move our Title I funding or how we're going to work with partners to invest in different ways. One thing I tell folks that's important for a school district to do is to not only think about funding in terms of money, but to think as funding as term of partnerships, right? In most cities I've been in, there are various partners that are in there that can help you supplement in different ways to help accomplish things. And so that's kind of the strategy I think about. And the other component is going back to when I talked to you about social emotional learning, getting children to be able to kind of get some of the skills that they don't have, whether it's being self-aware, self-regulate, getting through some success. Those are components that you have to build in children who come from very challenging homes, because they get that, quite frankly, from schools. And so those partnerships, and it's not just the teacher alone, I tell folks, teachers have a lot on their plate, and they want to make sure they support kids, but you have to help them and put supports in there to help them be successful around those pieces.
Well, that's actually a great segue to the next question. You might have seen that, about partnerships. We have had a lot of starts and stops in our community with kind of multi-sector partnerships. Recently, a initiative called QEA that had invested $37.5 million with philanthropy and business. So you just touched on it a little bit, but if you could talk about your philosophy regarding partnerships and share with us specifically an initiative that you've led that involved multiple partners, like local government, philanthropy, nonprofits, and businesses. What were the outcomes and what were the lessons learned?
Yeah, so I'll just use the recent, my recent experience in Nashville. I sit on the, we call it the Alignment Nashville Board. It's where we work with the chamber and different community partners throughout the city, where they match up with not only somebody from the school district, but a local partner. And that could be, for example, we have what they call teams. So when we say we want to work on the literacy for elementary kids, we have a partner, the folks who work in the school system, and we have a local partner matched up with them. And then we do that through the Alignment Nashville Alignment. And so each of these areas are targeted around the particular strategic plan focuses on that we're trying to move. And we're big, and we also would say, I think I've said this before, is what I've learned with the philanthropic communities is that you have to be able to show metrics and show impact. And I tell people that it's fair. And one of the things of a lesson learned, I think that we districts can do better, is you don't partner just to partner. You have to partner strategically around moving what you need to move, and there needs to be a 3 to 5 year layout plan of that partnership. So we can look every year or quarterly. We actually meet on the alignment team every month to see what our movement is in that together. And then from there, we can measure how we adjust the strategy or keep the strategy the same if it's having impact. And what you learn is when there's confidence in dollars in that way, we find that their investments is easier to make. But the partners are probably also talking to their board about a particular thing that they want to invest in too. So like I said, school systems partners, we should not be coming back to schools, to partners and saying, oh, we need more dollars for this, we need more dollars for that. We should be able to have a consistent plan on saying, here's where our investments are, and then here's what we need to do to move it, and then we need to make it public. I think making things public is a good thing. I tell folks it is not bad. You gotta get the community to see why you're doing X, and here's what it looks like when it's successful. Yesterday, I sat with a board member and I asked them, I said, well, what's your thing? You know, because I've been on 3 different cabinets, and I said, well, what's your thing? And they told me what the thing was. And I said, okay, and they talked about it, and they talked about the great work that they were doing, and they said, I wish we could do more of it. And I said, okay, so what would it look like at a high level? They began to list what it would look like. And I said, so I feel like you can feel it, you can touch it, you can connect with it. I said, if I walked out and asked 10 people that you feel real comfortable with, if they can describe the same thing you just said, would they be able to do that? Well, we got to work on communications. I said, yeah. One thing we have to be able to do, at least I can say the districts that I've seen be successful, is you have to be able to be clear that the community know what things look like. And I tell folks, you define what you want to do, you then talk about what it looks like, then you talk about your implementation and how you're going to monitor and support those things. And the look like and the feel and all that is what galvanizes the community to partner to move that. And it makes also partners feel like I can actually invest more in them. I've learned the more success, my current, the superintendent in Nashville says to me all the time, he said, the more people see the success in it and they get constant feedback on it, the more comfortable they are in giving you more dollars. True statement. And the more you do that better over time, the more you'll get those investments. I wouldn't want anybody to want to give us any dollars if we can't be clear on what the metrics is, how we're going to make sure people know what it looks like, and then more importantly, how do we make sure that everybody has buy-in as a community, that they see that that's something that's needed. Because if they don't see that, even if we may think it's a great idea, without their buy-in, that becomes another challenge and another hump. And sometimes that's challenges in certain particular communities than others.
Good morning. How would you promote workforce development to assure our local businesses have a pipeline of adequate talent?
So one thing I would say, which I definitely would tell you that I've learned, but this was already existing in Nashville before I got there, was they have this thing called the Academies of Nashville, which I'll use as an example. And it's been there for 10 years. I'm not saying we would do that here, but unless the community wanted to do that. But I would just say to you, they have where kids go through these pathways and they're wall-to-wall academies where kids would go through these pathways to get certifications for particular jobs. And so a kid can come out of that job and get a high school degree and a certification. And they've partnered, the business partner has partnered with particular schools. And they have this whole piece where, I'll give you an example. Deloitte is partnered with one of our high schools, and they work through with them for kids to get certification to go get direct jobs there. I would argue that's one of the best models I've ever seen that's actually happened. The challenge around it, we tell folks sometimes, is, it's wall to wall, and not everybody may want that type of model, but it really helps around creating pipeline. And so other districts I've been in, they have different type of, and it's more like a CTE model, but think about it for not only for like certain professions, but like, aviation, and because I think when people think about CTE, they think about just a plumber or a welder or something like that. CTE could be a lot of different things. I tell folks there's kids now getting certifications on things. They don't even have college degrees, and they make more money than the kid who went to college. So those are kind of the pieces I would say I've seen done really well around that. And so those may be some models that we could look at, but also assessing what we already have, right? Because I go back and again and say it's important to kind of listen and learn what we've been doing, and then how we would go about building on those pieces. But that's a model that we work with in Nashville that I'm a huge part of, around where we're pushing for more kids to get certification, industry certifications, and then pairing them up with businesses. There's a lot of money in our cities with different sets of partners, but I do think you have to work collectively to guide with them around what it looks like for success, and then how do we engage the community for that success. It's important to make sure communities have buy-in in a lot of different ways. I think disenfranchised communities, people think they try to make decisions for them, and I tell folks, you gotta get them a part of the process. And getting them a part of the process makes a huge difference, I think, in long-term sustainability. If I do my job right, if I'm chosen as a superintendent, and I'm here for a long time, because I told the board members I want to be here for a long time, then years from now, when the next person comes, we have things so in place that it's the vibrance of the city we're going to see. And these are the kids who are going to take over for us, right? Whether it's industry foundations and those pieces. I don't know if people think about it that way, but that's kind of why the investment for us is really important in our kids, is the long-term viability of the city.
Over here, please. Welcome to Jacksonville. Duval County, I should say, in this case. Describe your approach, please, to dealing with change, developing creative solutions, and taking on risk. That's a three-part question.
Probably all of the above for me. So I've been involved in a lot of changes. I tell people right, wrong, or indifferent. They were changes. And whether they've had success or not, that would be measured on, I always say, how many kids have succeeded with that change. Because I tell folks that to me is the real indicator of whether it's been successful or not. And also if they've been sustainable. Because you can make a change around something and then it's wiped out as soon as the people are no longer there. So a couple of things. I want to make sure I get your 3 points. So you asked about
dealing with change, developing creative solutions, and taking on risk.
Right, so I'm going to go backwards if that's okay, and then I may look at you a little bit to make sure I'm answering each point. So let's start with risk. If you look at my resume, you probably might think I'm too risky. I have no fear around moving things and trying to move the needle. I am very sensitive around making sure that people are engaging in the process. I've learned sometimes, and this is maybe a very bad thing to say, that sometimes I've seen people care more about the process than the outcome. But the reality is I think both are very important. And so when I think about risk, I think that people think risk are when you want to push the envelope. Well, pushing the envelope is awesome, I think, but you have to make sure you galvanize people in the pushing. I've learned when you do it without bringing people along, or at least engaging in a conversation about where it needs to be, then it becomes a problem. Then people feel like you're doing things to them and they're not a part of. And that has no sustainability, because then I've seen things that are good for communities, but because you didn't engage them and you didn't do it with them, or you didn't make them a part of the process, they rejected it, even if it was good for kids. I mean, I've seen that happen, and that made me want to throw up. But the lesson learned is that you have to go through that process to move that change from a risk standpoint. On the second part, you talked about creative solutions. I always find that an interesting question because, first of all, I don't work in isolation. And I think creative solution comes when you bring the right people at the table to help you solve the right problem. And then you're able to map that out over time. And so when you talk about right solutions, I've learned that solutions that are right are based on how well people are embracing it, people are able to engage in it, and people are clear about how to get to the outcome. And so that takes over time. And so when I think about creative solution, that's how I think about that. I don't know what the difference sometimes between being creative and not creative. I know the difference at time of how we think in different ways to solve a problem. And I also think about different ways on how you have to tap into different folks to get to that. I'm not a believer that you make a decision by yourself. I may be the superintendent, but I would tell you, it doesn't mean I'm the smartest guy in the room. It may mean I'm strategically building a coalition to move us to a direction. It may mean I'm engaging you with a lot of conversation to move you over maybe a wall you may have. It may mean I'm trying to push you a little bit to say, this is not that bad. Let's try it, because you get people who say, well, this will never work. And I say, well, you ever tried it? Well, or I may say, hey, let's pilot a little bit. That's another strategy I use on trying to scale up, because the problem that you have with large districts is scaling to quality. But that's how I kind of think about that for solutions. The third part, you talked about change. Change is always an interesting word, I find. Because the issue I don't think always is around change, I think is around change management. When you're pushing to change, you have to be able to be clear about what people's values are, because there's a gap. Our superintendent talked to the principals last week in a book by a guy named Heifetz and he talked about the gap between, he said that CEOs and leaders live between two gaps. They have to forecast something, and then on the other half, they have to really be clear about what's going on here to kind of move people to that forecasting. And there's all of it in the middle. And he said that the reality is that leaders live in chaos, and that's normal. He said you don't go fix chaos, you manage chaos. And I know that's kind of a crazy way to say it, but when you're trying to push for innovation, you have to do that, because we usually do things that we feel comfortable with, it's like I tell folks, I love my mom's food. Probably because all those years she's been feeding me. I love my wife's food too, but I love mom's food. So I managed through that chaos a little bit. Just kidding, I'm just kidding. She's good. She's a good sport. She's a good sport. But the point I'm trying to make though is that you have to kind of manage through those pieces, because when you want to do things that are different, it's not that people sometimes, I don't think, always want to do it. Is that the unknown to folks is scary, right? I think about kids who go to college and they've never been to a college campus. And then people look at them 3 or 4 years later, once you push them to get to the campus, and they're like, oh, and then they're totally different entering freshman than they were junior or senior, right? And so you got to do that. And the reality, too, is I think as a community, we have to be very sensitive on how we push various communities to be a part of the processes. When you work in particular places, I could tell you on your more urban cores, if it's a community that has never been attended to and people have never engaged them in the process, they're going to be very sensitive around trust and around certain things, and so you have to work through those things. If on the other extreme, it's an affluent group where they get everything they want and they have access to push certain things, well, they have a certain way they think, and so you got to get them to be in line to work with folks and say, no, we got to think about equity across all schools, and how do we, so those are kind of the management pieces you have to do, and collectively do that so people can see that vision, so support can happen for teachers and principals on the ground. We can cause, I tell folks, there's something I try to do in Nashville is we make policies up here, and then I go visit schools, and I don't really say a whole lot, but I'm really going to visit schools to see if we just cause chaos in the school. Not just looking to say, wow, how did this policy actually translate? And then I go back and talk to the team and say, how do you think this thing is going? It's, oh, it's great, because at this level, everybody tells you it's great. And I said, I just saw in a meeting, it looked like this, this, and this. So we have to kind of create feedback loops a lot. Feedback is important. One thing I do in my practice is I do roundtables with principals all the time. We also do teacher-educator voice sessions, trying to listen to teachers to see how they're interpreting that by districts and communities. And then doing the same thing with your partners to see how they're feeling. Because as you're moving the work, there's a lot of different entities coming to you. You know, when I tell people there's a difference in urban, think about 50,000 people pulling at you. That's the job I'm signing up for. Right? And so you gotta constantly communicate, constantly engage, constantly work with people. And that's how you kind of move the ship. People have to feel that you can connect with everyone, and everyone's voice matters just as much as whether you're somebody that is an influencer or not. And so that's kind of the space that I work from.
Hi.
Hi.
You didn't think I was going to get to you. I have two questions, so I'm going to
Yes.
shift them a little bit because I'm afraid we might run out of time, and they're both pretty essential to the group that I represent.
Yes.
So the first question was, in Florida, we're a right-to-work state,
Yes.
but our collective bargaining is embedded in our state constitution, which is vastly different than most southern states.
Yes.
So do you believe in a collaborative bargaining process? And would you please share with the group your bargaining experience, both positive and negative? And then I'll ask you the second question.
All right. So
Thank you.
And I would recommend you call Eric Huth, who's an MNEA.
I already have.
Oh, good. So Eric can tell you. Me and Eric are best friends. One thing I tell folks is, and I go back again because I've learned lessons. Regardless of positions around issues, you got to work with people. I meet with him every month. He'll tell you, and always trying to problem solve issues and collectively try to work through things. And I know that there's always different positions around those components. And so we're in the process right now of working on our version of an agreement, collaborative conferencing, and those pieces that we've been trying to work through there. And also, which is always challenging too, because it's not just the agreement, things have a cost number to them, because there's dollars and type of investments. And so we're trying to work through different type of issues on that. But my experience has been to kind of work closely all the time and engage constantly, because I've learned that when you don't have a line of communication to know where each other is around their position, it's a hard lift, because already there may be a history of bad history or good history, right? When it's good history, it makes it much easier, but just kind of a building of a trust around that we can agree on particular issues on moving the work. I have participated as a principal in giving my feedback in those type of panels when they've for collective bargaining issues. I haven't been the one to actually do it. Even if I was here as your superintendent, I would not sit at the table in the collective bargaining. I would assign particular staff members to do that, because they would do those logistics and then make sure that we can come to some agreements. I'd be talking to you a whole lot and saying, hey, what do you think? Because, you know, I feel like it's important that we work together, because you have a representation of group, and I represent trying to help move the work with students and communities as well. And so we have to kind of get to some common grounds, and then talk about what's realistic and not realistic. I think that sometimes there's challenges historically. We live, I don't know what the history of here has been around some of those things, but if it's been a fight, I've been in some states where it's been a battle, then, you know, you come in sometimes with whatever that battle has been. I mean, I tell folks, you know, when I was a principal in Boston, it was tough, you know, because they had us come in as turnaround principals, and they had all these different rules, and it was so divisive to children, to teachers, to the community that we served around that type of work. So that's the strategy I would do around collective bargaining. So in terms of my experience, I've worked through with the cabinet to talk through the issues, and always talk directly to the union leaders around that, but I haven't been the one that negotiated on the panel.
Okay. Well, bargaining here in Duval County is probably the best out of the 67 counties, and it's year-round. We have our collective bargaining contracts, but we're constantly changing with memorandums of understanding based on the needs of our students, our classroom, and our employees, and frankly, the philanthropist investments in our community and where we need to go to continue that growth and that pattern. So thank you very much. My second question is, and it's very important to where we are right now, how would you improve the morale of all of our employees so that they feel valued and respected? And I'm talking the white-collar workers, pink-collar, and the blue-collar.
Yeah. So I'm going to just say there's a couple of things that is our reality right now in education that's very political too. I think teachers should be paid more. I think paraprofessionals should be paid more. I think bus drivers should be paid more. I think this notion of, you know, we ask you for more, but we have you living at a certain pay scale where you can't even pay to put bread in your fridge or anything like that. So I think it's important that we do that. But from a cultural standpoint, I think professional development is important. I think planning time is important. I think if a teacher doesn't have time to plan, they can't do the work. Doesn't matter how much scripted or how much you want to tell them, you know, to work harder, change these grades. They need time to do that. I mean, if I had it my way, probably giving too much information right now, but I would push a lot on, you know, partnering with universities and community partners about creating a teacher center where we can have mentoring, where teachers can funnel through around best practices for mentorships and those pieces, because that helps with your retention. I think teachers get burnt out. I was a teacher. I will tell you, it is tough job. You have multiple students coming in every day. You have to move the work. You have to constantly do things. And if you're in schools where it's challenging, it's even tougher, right? Because you're dealing with, you know, children who come to you with different type of trauma. And you have to also manage through that. And so the support systems have to be in place for those things. And so that's kind of how I think about that. And also I think that, you know, you have to create conditions for people to want to work in, and conditions for people to feel that they could be successful, and be clear about what that looks like. And I think you have to do a lot of work not only with the teachers, with paraprofessionals, you have to also do a lot of work with principal development. I think leadership matters. I don't think there's such thing as a Superman. I've seen districts where, you know, this is the great person and that's the great person, and I've seen that work sometimes well, and I've seen that fail miserably. And I think so you have to be able to help develop and provide supports to know what that looks like. I think schools and communities have particular DNAs. And so I'm a big believer that even when you're choosing a leader for a school, you should have the community involved in that. I was a part of the process of changing that in Nashville. Nashville, we used to just move principals all over the place in the middle of the year and all that stuff. If I'm your superintendent, that's not a belief system I have. I believe you should have community panels. I believe you should have different stakeholders, partners of that school, to sit there with teachers as well to help choose that principal. And then from there, you can come down and I can sit with the leaders around which leader and what skill set fits, and then also be able to give them feedback on what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. I don't think we always do the greatest job on giving feedback. I'm just telling folks it's, you know, just saying we're going to do it off an evaluation paper, that doesn't get the job done. I think you have to have constant conversations. Everybody wants to give their best in education. People who do this job want to give their best, and so you have to create opportunities for them to do that. I mean, when you look at the best Fortune 500 companies or companies that are doing really well, that's a part of their DNA, right? And we have to be able to create those systems for that success to happen. But just by saying this kid is struggling and you got to figure it out, that's not the best strategy. So that's kind of how I think about that work.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences and your values with us. Is there something you'd like us to know about which we did not ask a question? And then would you also like to provide some closing remarks?
Yes, can I ask you a question or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the only thing that's really important to me, and I know we can't go through the whole panel because we won't have time, but collectively, like what, if I was chosen as your superintendent and 10 years from now you said, wow, you know, we made the right choice with Narcisse to have been our superintendent, what are the top 3 things that you would say it would look like?
Is that okay? First of all, it would be that none of our children are left behind. We know there are strategic academic levels of all of our children in any county, anywhere, especially in urban districts. But the emphasis, they will not be cookie cutters. They will be dealt with like individual children and students, and none of our students would be left behind. I don't care if they're at the beach or the west side or Mandarin or wherever else, because in every work facility we have, there are students with academic challenges, and those challenges need to be met at the highest level. The second thing is we would decrease the turnover of teacher turnover. We would have better recruitment and retention, and a lot of that, there's a multiple level of why this is happening, but that would be decreased, and we would encourage people to continue to be career educators again. And lastly, but not no means least, we would be the shining star in this state for people wanting to come to Duval County with strong philanthropy, with community engagement, faith-based communities, and a total wall-to-wall involvement and engagement of truly understanding the direction that not only from where we came, but where we are now and where we want to be in the future. And we can't do that in isolation. It's got to be a true across the board. So those are my 3 major emphases. And of course, employees get paid more.
I think success would be more children coming back to Duval County Public Schools and not going to schools outside our county or choosing a charter school. And also I think success would be, goodness, having a superintendent for 10 years, how nice that would be.
I'll be here if you want. I did it. Anything else?
Yeah, mine would be, and you've touched on it very well for me, by the way, but the inclusion of many factors in our community, not just isolated to, but the business community is important, certainly our government is important, and making sure that you are the fighter for those strategic plans that you put in place.
In 10 years, I would be very optimistic and say we will have no low-performing schools, no low-performing students. Everyone will graduate with a high school diploma. Those who can and want will go on to college. Others will be able to find good-paying jobs in Duval County.
So I will, anybody else? All right, I will answer your last question. You have an important decision to make. Do not take it lightly. The reality is there are a lot of politics, there are a lot of contexts, and a lot of things that go on even as you get the person to sit in the seat to interview. I would say to you that you're going to need to make sure that your next superintendent is transparent, the community trusts. When the community sees that person, they know that they can connect with anybody from any community. They are a part of the community. They can engage with the community. They will be fiscally responsible to make sure in 10 years from now we are always in a good financial state. There are definitely markers in the board that can say, wow, we actually move the needle around particular areas, and everybody, no matter where they are, can agree to that. And last but not least, that they love to connect with people and listen. I would argue with you that that is the urban superintendent that you need next for Duval. And I would also argue with you, I am that guy. If I'm chosen to be this superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, those would be my pieces that I would make sure would be important to me. I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, you've honored us with your time and energy. Thank you so much, and we're honored to have met you. Thank you.
Thank you.
now on the phone tell them how to fix it. Yeah. I actually met the guy who created that program in Michigan several years ago.
Let's go around the table again and introduce ourselves here.
Morning, Laura Hips.
Good morning.
Good morning, Elaine Brown, and I'm the mayor of Neptune Beach.
No, I'm Elaine Brown. No, just kidding. Terry Brady. I'm president of Duval Teachers United, and we represent multiple units within our group beyond teachers, and it's 11. We represent about 11,200 of the employees in Duval County.
Eleanor Atkins, representing the Jacksonville branch, NAACP.
Good morning. I'm Susan Toller. I'm Vice President of the Florida Blue Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Susan Cuthbertson. I'm a small business owner.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Cable. I'm the president of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations located here in Jacksonville, and I'm representing the City Council today. Excuse me, the Civic Council.
Good morning. I'm Nina Waters, president of the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, and along with the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, we led the Quality Education for All initiative.
I'm Jordan Baker, and I'm a retired principal, and I'm representing the concerned citizens in support of education.
Jeff Edwards, Beaver Street Fisheries, and I'm representing the business community.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Edelman, a retired teacher, and I would say community relic, but I serve on the board of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund.
They have 15 questions for you. 1 hour set aside.
Hi, Dr. Pruitt.
Good morning.
What about you, your personality, your skills, your goals, etc., along with your perception of the Duval County Public Schools' strengths, opportunities, and challenges, makes you feel that you're the right person coming to the right place at the right time? Or more succinctly, why do you want to be our next superintendent, and why should we want you to be our superintendent here?
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Duval County School Board for inviting me to interview and meet all of you today and meet with them yesterday. And so to start off on why I should be considered to be the next superintendent of Jacksonville, I think that my personality is one of collaboration and trust and transparency. I believe in the power of intelligence and having really smart people around me and making decisions and allowing leaders to lead. I think the skill set that I bring to this position is based on my experience in both Chicago and Illinois. I'm used to the challenges and have dealt with the challenges of large urban school districts, the issues around financing, the issues of significantly improving schools, the issues around ensuring that we're offering the best services to our students. And my philosophy is world-class cities need world-class school districts. And so that's been my philosophy both in Chicago, both from just experience and working with great leaders, and then I think my vision for and reason for coming to Jacksonville is because I've dealt with the challenges that you're dealing with. In Chicago, we dealt with a budget deficit, and I got past that. Currently in Houston, we're dealing with a $115 million budget deficit, but despite Hurricane Harvey, the deficits that we're experiencing, we're seeing some dramatic gains in how our students are performing based on our strategy and approach to supporting students in all types of environments and schools. This is a good fit because based off of my conversations, based off what I've read and learned about the district, this community wants to see Duval County be successful. We're very close to becoming an A district, but again, based on my conversations, we can't be satisfied with just being an A district, because then that means are all of our schools A's or just a certain percentage? And so although we've made gains, I'm the type of person, and my experience has proven that once we set a goal of getting better, I have a track record of improving outcomes for kids and making campuses more productive learning environments for our students.
There's a relatively fine line between effective, inclusive leadership and dictatorship, as well as between effective, inclusive leadership and paralysis. Using whatever terms you are comfortable with and using specific examples from your current or previous leadership positions, tell us about your leadership style. How do you bring people along with you, and how do you know when to step out ahead?
And so, again, my leadership style is collaborative. However, just to give you an idea of the way I think and what I expect of people that work with me, the team that I have, we've recently read a book called Multipliers. And the tenets of this book is around valuing intelligence. And the leader who's leading an organization does not necessarily have to be the smartest person in the room, but they must value the intelligence of the people that are around them and work to multiply their intelligence, therefore improving outcomes for the organization. So in terms of a school district, I'm going to put really smart people around me, or have really smart people around me, and work to make them more intelligent around doing the work to serve kids. And that improves, not necessarily being, it doesn't improve being a dictator. It involves allowing them to lead, coaching with supervision, and giving them the authority and responsibility to make their department, their sphere of influence really effective. Where you get in front of this is, as a superintendent, and working with the school board, we have to ensure that we have unity of message around what our priorities are. And so what that means is every department in central office has vision and mission around that are aligned to the priorities that have been set by the school board and district. And then what that means is that central office is then doing hopefully a really effective job of supporting schools. My philosophy is, and for the people that would be on my team, is the purpose of central office is to serve schools and not the other way around. And so it's not necessarily being a dictator, it's setting up systems to monitor how are we meeting outcomes that we've established, and having systems to measure those outcomes periodically throughout the school year, whether it be qualitative through surveys, talking to parents, talking to our community, or quantitative, looking at student data, looking at performance data for different departments. So it's not necessarily being a dictator. It's not being a dictator. It's allowing your people to lead and then holding them accountable for our outcomes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
For better or worse, parents and communities are embracing school choice and a wider range of school options. How do you view the choice movement, specifically non-district charters, and how would you approach the growing movement in Duval County?
And so I come from a district of choice. And I think that one of the things that large urban school districts must do in light of the rise in charters is not be afraid of competition. And so the charters that have been successful, I think we need to look at what they're doing. What's attracting our families away from our school district to charters, whether that be facilities, whether that be programs, and then identify what we as a school district can do to attract those families back to Duval County. From what I understand, we have 23,000 empty seats in Duval County. And so what have we done to talk to parents, to talk to kids. What do you want to see in our schools? Again, we can't be afraid of competition. What we do have to do is stop doing the same thing that we've always done, and think outside the box and try to become more innovative around how to attract, how to market the district, how to build better programs for our students. And this involves us having an understanding that college might not be the outcome for all of our kids. It might be career, it might be trade school. And so what are we doing from pre-K to 12th grade to prepare our kids to be productive citizens, whether in college, whether in trade school, whether in the job market? It's our responsibility to make Duval County the most competitive and compel our families to come back to Duval County, because we're going to offer the best programs. They're going to receive the best service, and they're going to get the best education from the people that are in our district.
The next question is about school board relations. Please tell us the last time that you took a strong position in conflict with your school board. What was the particular issue, and how was it resolved? And if you could be as specific as possible, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
So as I shared earlier, our district is currently under a $115 million deficit. And so based on our budget model, which is basically a student-based budgeting model, it was proposed, and this budget model has been in place for a while in HISD. And so it was proposed a few months ago that we transition to an FTE model. And board members receive feedback from principals, teachers, community. And so that really involved, and we were very firm in our stance around needing an FTE model in order to help us balance our budget for the 18-19 school year. But in our stance, we understood the importance of listening to, again, the people that are on the ground doing the work that the superintendent is asking them to do and having an impact on kids. And so what we ended up doing, again, this is again a tenet of my philosophy, getting feedback and actually listening to the people who are actually doing the work. What we did was we brought all of our departments together, and then we brought principals in to help us figure out what we need to do to ensure that we had minimal impact on kids and schools, but then also meet the need of balancing our budget. And so that resulted in us not moving to an FTE model, but then adopting a modified student-based budgeting model to support both our students, principals, and more importantly, our teachers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's all about money, right? Not really. It's all about the students, and I know that. And facing the fiscal constraints that most school districts do and have been, and it continuing, what is the process that you would use to meet these needs and to still preserve the educational quality for our students?
My plan, and again, this is based off an initial conversation that I had with the district CFO, is we need a 10-year financial plan for the district, which involves looking at central office and seeing if there is any duplicity in jobs. And what I mean by that is, do we have multiple people at central office doing the same thing? And then where can we cut costs and save money for the district? This also involves, although 5% reserves is a goal, in my experience, best practice for an organization this size with a $7 billion budget is to have 3 months cash reserves. And so what that equates to as part of this 10-year financial plan is we need to figure out how to have at least $250 million in our cash reserves to one, show the community, the business community, and our partners that we're fiscally responsible with tax dollars. In addition to that, if selected as superintendent, we're going to have to be much more fiscally responsible and conservative going into the 18-19 school year and beyond. We have to, in basic terms, we can't spend money we don't have. And so once we have, if we're not understand, we're going to be adopting a budget, I believe this month, or this month, we have to ensure that we adhere to that budget, and then, again, central office working to support schools based on the budget that we have. And with this 10-year plan, we have to envision, where do we see our schools in 10 years with regards to student performance. And from what I understand, we have the oldest buildings in Florida. Again, world-class city needs a world-class school district. And so that means that we need to update our facilities, whether that's building new buildings, refurbishing our buildings. Again, we need to figure out how to compete with surrounding districts, charters, and make this, and again, compel families to come back because they know they're going to have 21st century learning in 21st century buildings.
This question is designed to help us understand who you are as a person. Would you describe for us some of your hallmark values and the values that we would see in you likely as we as a community work with you? And then what motivates you, both in the good times but also in those really tough times when you need to keep going? So tell us about you as a person.
Absolutely. And so I think one of the issues or one of the challenges with being an administrator is we often ignore our own development. And so I decided along with my team at the beginning of this year is that I'm going to ensure that I'm reading a lot more books around leadership and around education to again re-energize me, make sure I understand why I'm, reiterate why I'm doing this. And so one of the books that I've reread is two books that I've reread that have continued to motivate me and recharge me is The Miseducation of the Negro, and then Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community by Dr. King. And I chose to reread these books because it gives you a glimpse of what education was like not too long ago, and what we're still fighting for today as far as equity. And it's not necessarily a black and white issue, but we're dealing with issues around our special ed students. We're dealing with issues around over-identifying black and brown kids in special ed. We're dealing with issues of not identifying students who can be gifted and talented. We're dealing with issues not pushing kids into those AP courses or advanced courses in middle school and high school. And so, reading is a way I refocus my efforts and remind myself around why I got into this work and why education for me is a calling, and why being superintendent of Jacksonville is, I believe, my next assignment for my career. And so I believe that I'm very collaborative. I value relationships. However, in order for us to build those relationships, it requires me to listen, ask the right questions, and if selected to be the next superintendent of Jacksonville, because I haven't been here, I actually see that as an advantage for me, because I'm going to ask a lot of questions, both of staff at central office, principals, teachers, our unions, and then reach out to the community to learn as much as I can about what Duval County is doing really well and what are the areas of growth. And again, part of the plan is being very strategic around designing an approach to meet the needs of everyone, knowing that I'm not going to meet the needs of everyone, but addressing the core issues around which we make this a world-class school district.
Hi there. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
The question that I have is, what do you prioritize as Duval's biggest challenge to advance in educational performance? How would you address this obstacle, including naming the success factors associated with it?
And so I think the biggest issues facing Duval County revolve around literacy. I think that if we want a responsive, accountable, engaged citizen that graduates from our schools, we have to address that beginning in pre-K and identifying what our goals for what our goals are for a global graduate. And so, since I have community here, what do we want to see in global graduates? And I know for a fact, if we don't have a literate community, a literate society, it impedes our ability to be thought partners with one another, to be critical of one another, to be innovative for the school district. And so I think literacy, as far as our performance, is continues to be the next level work for a district of this size. I also think as far as priority, again, we've experienced success over the past few years. However, if based on this year's data, we do become a A-rated school district, we can't be satisfied with that outcome. Now, we can celebrate it, but we have to identify, we've reached this goal. Are we going to work to sustain it, or are we going to work to improve what we've done so far? And so my role as the superintendent would be to, again, bring everyone together, listen, and then identify where are opportunities for continued growth over the next 5, 7, 10 years for Duval County.
Educating the whole child is one of those goals which is in constant jeopardy relative to the recent cuts in pendants of music, art, PE, and other social, emotional, recreational programs considered by some not to be a part of the academic core. As superintendent, how important is educating the whole child to you, and what steps will you take to ensure that the whole child experience is available to all students?
So I believe that in order for us to educate the whole child, we have to look at the adults who are educating them. And so what that means, what I mean by that is, I think cultural competence is vital to us educating the entire child. If we have staff, if we have principals, if we have teachers who are culturally competent, who value the strengths of the students that are in our schools, who look at them from a growth mindset versus a deficit mindset, I think we begin to address those issues that our students need. Addressing the whole child is identifying their social strengths, their academic strengths, their cultural strengths, and then the adults responsible for teaching them capitalize on that and ensure that they are getting the support they need to be as successful as possible. But in order for us to do that as superintendent, cultural competence requires PD. And it also requires the school leaders, the teachers, central office staff to understand who they are, what their biases are, and how those biases impede our ability to address the needs of the whole child, because we're so focused on one or two aspects of education. Okay. So you're speaking to a former band, orchestra, jazz member. I played the trumpet. Well, I tried to play the trumpet. I played football, captain of my football team, played basketball. I didn't run track. You know, it was just a way to not be at home. So I was on the track team. And so I think the arts are vital to addressing the needs of the whole child. In addition to that, the talents of our children don't always manifest in pre-K or kindergarten. Some of our students' academic talents may not manifest themselves until middle school or high school. In my case, my academic talents didn't manifest themselves until after I got out of the Marines and went to college. You know, so it takes time. However, the draw for me was band. Yeah, it was football. It was basketball. It was Fellowship of Christian Athletes, the clubs that we offer. And so absolutely, the programs, the clubs that we offer, the arts are vital. I would work to protect, to ensure that we're offering those types of programs, continue to offer and possibly expand those opportunities for our kids, because they are meaningful, and they are a way for our kids to demonstrate intelligence other than taking a test.
What have you done in your current and past positions to improve low-performing schools, to help low-performing students in all schools in the district, and to address the diverse needs of the schools and communities in one or more of the districts where you were employed?
So over the past 20 years, that's been my work. That's been my calling. And I hate using the term turnaround. I really think that it's a strategy to improve all schools. In my current role, I have the lowest performing campuses in the district. And so my strategy has been to focus on leadership excellence, teacher excellence, instructional excellence, school design, social emotional learning, and family and community empowerment. And those are the pillars by which I've operated this entire year around supporting all the campuses and significantly improving principal performance, teacher performance, and ultimately student performance. That's resulted in the strategy with those pillars is around identifying the most effective school leaders, identifying the most effective teachers who can go into some of our most challenging schools and make a difference in students' lives. And I'm sure Duval experiences the same thing with some of our struggling campuses where we have mobility of teachers. And so what's really key to sustaining success when we move a campus from F to C is we need a stable teaching force. We need the school leader to stay on campus for at least 5 to 7 years. And so we've really worked hard. I've really worked hard in selecting, again, the most effective teachers, the most effective school leaders, and identifying how we support the people who are interacting with our students on a daily basis. This also has involved, as far as improving schools, identifying essential supports for these campuses. And so our board in Houston identified 3 essential positions that all of these schools would have: a librarian, a counselor, a psychologist, and a nurse. And then what's key, and some people get upset because, well, all the low-performing schools are getting all the resources. That's equity. Why shouldn't they get the resources? If we really value the success of all of our schools in the district, why wouldn't we want to move all of our campuses from F to C and then from C to A? And so it requires equity, and it requires a tiered approach for the district around how we support our lowest performing schools, our mid-performing schools, and our high-performing schools. I can guarantee you that if selected, if identified as the next superintendent, I can go in and identify how we can make the best high school even better. in addition to going into our lowest performing campus and identifying how to make them better. That's actually easier to go into lower performing schools, but we often ignore the ones who are doing really well. And so that's been my approach around supporting teachers and school leaders and those campuses that are underserved and underperforming in Houston.
Thank you. We've had a number of starts and stops in our community as it relates to partnerships and community engagement, including a recent Quality Education for All initiative that had invested $37.5 million in our schools with philanthropy and business. So talk about your philosophy regarding partnerships and share with us an initiative that you have led that involved multiple partners like local government, philanthropy, nonprofits, and businesses. What were the outcomes and what were the lessons learned?
So the initial question was a philosophy around partnerships and community. And so again, this comes back to the priorities that the district has set. In order for us to have productive partnerships and to effectively engage the community, we have to have unity of message, and we have to understand what our priorities are, because then that helps us frame the conversations that we're having with our partners. Our partners have to understand that the goal is to have, again, world-class school district means world-class schools. And so based on the services or the funding that you are offering to bring to the district, how does that fit into the priorities that the district has identified? And if it doesn't, is there compromise in how we might use those services and resources that you're offering to realign them to our priorities and not compromise what our priorities are? And in some cases, we may have to turn people away if they are wanting to dictate what our priorities should be when we've already received feedback and collaborate with our community around these are our key priorities. And so in my current role around working with partners and the community in an area of Houston where the University of Houston is, social services and health services has been real important to our community. And so that's involved working with the university, working with the Department of Health and Safety in Houston, and identifying what we can bring into the schools to further support our families and schools around mental and physical health. And so that's resulted in us identifying schools that will receive clinics for those campuses that will be open not only to our students, but then the community during school hours and after school hours.
Morning, or almost afternoon. How would you promote workforce development to assure our local businesses have a pipeline of adequate talent?
Could you repeat it one more time, please?
Sure. How would you promote workforce development to assure our local businesses have a pipeline of adequate talent?
And again, earlier I referenced what's our vision of the global graduate. And so in order for us to identify what that is, it has to involve our business partners and the community around what do they want to see in the workforce that they'll have in 5, 10, 15 years from now. And so what that means is, again, if it involves us pushing kids to college that want to go to college, but it also requires us to look at how are we developing our CTE programs in our high schools. And then with the CTE programs, if we have natural feeders in Duval County, what are we doing in the middle schools to set them up for those CTE programs and college prep courses that allow them to be successful? In Houston, we have a very robust offering of CTE programs in partnership with our business partners and the community around what they want to see in the next generation of workers in Houston. And I would do the same thing here in Jacksonville.
Welcome to Duval County. Please describe your approach. This is a three-part question.
Okay.
I'm happy to repeat it if needed. Please describe your approach to dealing with change, developing creative solutions, and taking risk.
So I think the one factor that allows adults to deal with change, and I focus on adults. Kids are really easy with dealing with change for the most part. It's often the adults that have issues with dealing with change. And so with a new superintendent coming in, with an interim superintendent that is well respected, it's going to be vital for me to support central office staff, principals, teachers, parents around upcoming pending change that may occur. I think the way we get to that point, as far as people being comfortable with change, is developing really meaningful relationships with all these stakeholders, and that involves. And part of my plan would be to get out in the community and do a lot of listening, not telling, not coming up with a plan in the first month. It involves a lot of listening. People need to understand and be comfortable with the next superintendent coming in and just listening and have a paradigm of understanding. You know, what are you most proud of? What are the challenges? How can I help you? What needs to change? And allow the stakeholders to identify the change that's needed versus an outsider coming in who, although has a lot of experience in large school districts, doesn't yet know the city, doesn't yet know the school district, the culture and climate. And so developing relationships, trusting relationships, and again, those relationships don't necessarily mean that we're going to always agree. However, if everyone in this room understands that I'm willing to listen and take feedback and then come up with a plan, as long as all of us are keeping the interests of kids at the forefront of these decisions, I'm very comfortable dealing with that change. As far as creative solutions, again, this goes back to having really smart people around me and people who aren't afraid of change, people who are willing to be courageous around being innovative, around doing something different that the district or the community isn't necessarily used to. And so having creative solutions requires us asking the right questions. Again, if we have 23,000 empty seats, have we asked the question, why? What have we done to get those students back? If we haven't asked those questions, then we can't come up with creative solutions on how to get those 23,000 students back into the seats in Duval County. And then as far as taking risks, I'm willing to take risks as long as they benefit children and don't harm children. If the risks involve bringing in resources, if it involves being really creative around bringing more arts programs, more athletic, more clubs to our students, I'm willing to take that risk. However, again, at the forefront of being willing to take a risk is keeping the interests of our kids at the forefront.
Hi, Dr. Pruitt.
Hello.
Two-part question. First one is relatively, I think, easy. How would you improve the morale of all of our employees, and that means white-collar workers, pink-collar, and our blue-collar workers, so that they all feel valued and respected? Because as a classroom teacher, they don't want to drive the buses or prepare the meals or clean the schools so that it helps with a better learning environment so they all work collaboratively. So what would you do to improve the morale of all the employees in this district so they feel valued and respected?
Is it two-part? That's the first part?
That's only the first part.
Okay.
I'm coming back.
Okay. So I'm sure being from Florida, everyone here has probably heard of the book, The Disney Way. And so I think that, you know, if morale is low, we really have to look at our culture and climate. You know, how do we go about interacting with our stakeholders? How do we go about, what does central office feel like? How do central office staff members, cabinet members interact with central office staff members? How does the superintendent interact with the community? How does the superintendent interact with principals and teachers? Do they have, am I giving opportunities for the union, for our politicians to come to the table and give us feedback? And I think that if morale is low, people don't feel valued. And I think the way you make people feel valued is by talking to them and, more importantly, listening to them. I've seen some superintendents talk at workers versus just listening. And so as a superintendent, I am willing and I do commit to listening to all staff. But again, it also comes down to, again, priorities. And I keep coming back to this. We have to be a priority-driven district. And we have to have a mission and a vision that all employees believe in. And if we have that, and they have a superintendent that's willing to listen, to act on the feedback that he or she is receiving, people begin to feel more valued. They believe to feel that they have an opportunity to change their district. Because although I might be the superintendent, this is our district. It's the community's district. They're community schools. And so everyone has to have a seat at the table and be given the opportunity to provide input on how to make the Duval way. You know, do we have a Duval way of doing things? And that's what I would be committed to doing.
Great. Thank you, sir. And the second question is, you might know or not know that Florida is a right-to-work state. But we're a little different than the other southern states. We have our collective bargaining in the Florida Constitution. It's not in state law. So this is where we're going to talk about next. Do you believe in collaborative bargaining process? And would you please share with the group what your experience has been through that bargaining process? And then the positives and the negatives. Or it could be the strengths and the weaknesses depending on your bargaining process. Thank you.
So the first part of, do I believe in the collective bargaining process? And so again, it comes back down to, and I've never worked with union presidents or union representatives, either both in Chicago and in Houston, that didn't have the interests of students in mind. And so in my experience, unions are there to protect the rights of their workers. And it's incumbent upon the superintendent and staff to ensure that our employees represented by unions have a safe environment and are receiving support that allows them to do their job. And so the benefits of having a collective bargaining process is ensuring that it's a system of accountability. It allows us to ensure that the district is providing the support to our staff members that allows them to do the work. A possible weakness could be around how that might impact our fiscal health based on salaries and benefits for staff. But I think that I think the strengths probably outweigh that weakness. And again, with union representation, if we have the best interest of our students in mind and having them at the table, and we're continually communicating with one another, I think that we can always come to a win-win situation for our kids.
Two-part question again.
Okay.
One is, what questions do you have for us? We have time for a couple of questions. Sure. And then second part is there something about you that you'd like us to know that we didn't ask about, and would you like to make some closing comments? So both of
Sure.
those.
So I'll make my closing comments after I ask the questions. First question, how might the superintendent improve collaboration with the community?
By valuing all stakeholders equally, not just those from the business community, but the moms and pops and so forth, because I think that's where we have a disconnect. In this environment, the majority tends to rule even if they're wrong. So in order to prevent that from happening, collaboration should be horizontal and vertical within all communities.
But also, you've talked a lot about listening and how you value that, and I think that, you know, getting to know the landscape and really doing that deeper dive into learning, you know, what organizations have to offer. And you'll find that there are a lot that feel passionate about helping students and seeing student success.
How might the superintendent improve communication with the community?
Be honest. Be honest and allow people to believe in you instead of just saying the company line, walking away, and then not following through. Just be honest and be transparent, and then the employees, and I believe most of our stakeholders, will buy into your mission, and they will also turn around and build a strong partnership that will be in your 10-year plan.
I think one of the challenges that we've had in the past is there's been fairly good communication externally, but there hasn't been, from my opinion, as good of communication internally. So I think the internal communication with the district is important because the district staff, teachers, workers are the biggest cheerleaders for the district, but they're also the group that can detract from the work. And so I think it's important to communicate internally first and get everyone on board there, and then the external communication will be a lot easier.
And I would urge your communication to be aspirational for the greater good of Jacksonville, so that there's an advocacy role the superintendent needs to play, managing upward across many different organizations within the within the city.
So I have a two-part question. So what needs to be accomplished in the first year? And then the second part of that is, what does the district look like? What should the district look like in 3, 5, 7 years?
I would say within 7 to 10 years, the district should have very, very, very few low-performing schools. We've never been without low-performing schools, but it should not be a large number. So every student who graduates should be able to read and compute in order to either go to college or get a job that pays very well, so he or she would be able to provide for his or her family.
I'd like to ditto what Elnora said, but in addition to that, in the first year, change is important, but it can't be done so quickly that individuals in the central office or school base or our maintenance yards don't understand what that change is and why it's happening. So that will in turn create more threatening environment, and we don't need that at this time. The second thing I believe is very important is to build and to strengthen the ability to recruit and retain the best we can bring to this district to service and meet the needs of our community and our students. Because right now, as we all know, education has shortfalls in every single community throughout this country. And I believe we are right on the cutting edge of being a district of greatness, as long as you have followed through with what you told us, with bringing in your philanthropists, your faith-based people, your community leaders, and listening to those that stand before our students every day and work in our district. And I believe we can garner that success and greatness sooner than just 7 years. I believe we can do it in the first couple of years, 2 or 3 years, if we satisfy those elements.
I would add kind of what Nina said before around that Duval County would be the best choice for families, and that families would want to move back into Duval County so that their children could attend Duval County Public Schools. But as well as kind of what Terry just said, that teachers want to work for us, that we're really the best choice for businesses, parents, students, families, and teachers and staff.
My vision for Duval in the next 3 to 7 to 10 years, hopefully 3, would be the envy of the educational process for everybody.
My hope is that within the first year, the superintendent and the school board can find a way of work that has mutual respect, and that the roles are clearly defined and followed so that they can work together hand in hand to meet all of these goals and have the vision for the district.
For the first year, my suggestion is that we do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some very positive things that's occurring here that we need to build upon. You may need to change the temperature of the water, the type of soap we use, but avoid you throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because there are a lot of great things that occur in here that you can build upon.
So again, I want to thank you for your questions. I hope that I was able to answer all of them. Some things that you probably don't know about me just yet. I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, born and raised. I've been married for the past 23 years to my wife, Kenya, who's a school counselor. I have 5 children, and one has decided to enlist in the Army, so she hopefully will be shipping off in this summer. And then so the other 4, which is really exciting about coming to Duval County, the other 4 will be attending Duval County Public Schools. And so we're really excited about that, about having all 4 of our kids in school, but more importantly in Duval County. Again, I want to thank you for your time, and I've really appreciated this process. Thank you.
Well,